Buenas tardes, señora Hernández.
Good afternoon, Ms. Hernandez. I'm going to ask you to read out the statement that you have before you. Good afternoon. I solemnly swear upon my honor and conscience that I shall tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Hernandez was also a witness that respondent did not include on their witness list of witnesses they intended to cross-examine. Ms. Hernandez, good afternoon.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Do you have in front of you a copy of the statement you have submitted in this arbitration dated May 14th, 2011?
Sí, así es.
Yes, that's right.
Do you ratify that statement and affirm its truthfulness before the tribunal?
Sí la ratifico.
Yes, I ratify it, and I affirm that what was included in the statement is the truth.
Ms. Hernandez, what is your occupation?
Actualmente
At this time, I am a professor and researcher at the Research Center of the School of Architecture, Universidad de San Carlos, Guatemala.
Are you familiar with the work of the Railroad Commission, which was first organized by the government of Guatemala in January 2005?
sí,
Yes, that's right. I am familiar with it.
And how are you familiar with it?
porque fui invitada
Because I was invited to participate in several of the meetings of that commission.
And who invited you to participate?
por parte de la coordinadora de la comisión
On behalf of the coordinator of the commission, we were invited to participate
en la misma.
in it.
And what was your understanding as to why you were invited to participate in the commission?
Se me invitó para
I was invited to
de esta comisión
be part of this commission
el caso de hacer un plan para
in relation to drawing up a plan for evicting the squatters in the rail right-of-way.
And why did they think that you would be able to help in the commission's work? What was your understanding of that?
bueno, yo he estado coordinando un
I've been coordinating a research project
el patrimonio inmobiliario de los ferrocarriles en Guatemala.
on the real property of the rail lines in Guatemala for purposes of conservation and use. And this included the question of dealing with squatters on the railroad right-of-way.
Do you recall Mr. Hector Pinto participating in some of the Railroad Commission meetings?
Sí, lo recuerdo.
Yes, I do.
How many meetings do you recall him participating in?
Por lo menos, creo que
At least, I think he participated in at least 2 of the meetings when I was there.
Whose interests did you understand Mr. Pinto was representing at the Railroad Commission meetings?
sí recuerdo
Yes, I recall that he mentioned that he was representing the sugar sector
alguna relación con
and some relationship with a real estate project called Ciudad del Sur
el área donde se estaba trabajando.
in the area where work was taking place.
And was it your understanding that the interests Mr. Pinto purported to be representing were interested in the restoration of rail service on the South Coast?
Evidentemente que sí, porque
Evidently, yes, because the proposal for rehabilitation for them was going to
llevar la mercadería
mean taking their merchandise, and it had to do with this development of this real estate development project.
Was the Railroad Commission ever successful in coming up with and implementing a plan to remove and relocate squatters from the South Coast right away?
No, it was not successful
había necesidad
in that regard. There was a
de
need
muchas cosas,
to do many things,
tener terrenos,
obtain
negociar
lots,
con los invasores,
negotiate with the
la
squatters,
comisión fracasó
and the
en
commission
el diálogo.
failed in that dialogue.
Was there an issue about having sufficient financing and money available to remove and relocate the squatters?
Así es,
That's right.
una cantidad muy grande
A very large sum was needed, which the government did not have, so as to be able to make an investment and make effective the eviction of the squatters, because it was necessary to purchase new lands, build housing, provide infrastructure and equipment, and the government didn't have that.
Did the commission fail because Ferrovias had indicated that it did not have sufficient financing or investment lined up to rehabilitate the South Coast right-of-way?
Pienso que
la comisión no
I think that the commission did not fail because Ferrovias didn't have the resources, but rather because the government
quiso continuar el diálogo para
did not want to continue the dialogue for making the large investment that was required.
Thank you, Ms. Hernandez. I have no further question.
Mr. Horta, Mr. Salinas.
Very
who is
briefly,
asking.
Mr. President.
Okay.
Ms. Hernandez, thank you very much for being here today. My name is Daniel Salinas. I'll be asking you some questions about your testimony here today. You mentioned to questions from Mr. Stern that there wasn't sufficient money to implement the plan to remove the squatters. Is that correct?
así es, ¿no?
That's right. There wasn't enough money.
Why FEWA didn't put the money down to remove the squatters, or why there wasn't sufficient funding?
desconozco cuál era el
I don't know what the motive was. It's just that that's what we were told in the commission, and my participation was merely as representative of an academic institution.
We're also asked, just at the end of Mr. Stern's questions, whether you knew whether the failure of the commission, as you called it, was due to Ferrovias' failure to obtain financing to rebuild the southern coast. Remember those questions?
Sí, recuerdo.
Yes, I recall, but could you repeat to me your exact question?
Only if you remembered that line of questions.
Sí, sí, las recuerdo.
Yes, I do remember.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. With regards to those questions, you have no knowledge, isn't it true, what it would have taken for Ferrovias to rebuild the southern coast, correct?
¿Puede repetirme la pregunta?
Could you repeat the question, please?
You don't know what it is that Ferrovias would have had to do to rebuild the entire southern coast, correct?
Entiendo que
la participación
I understand
de la
that
comisión era precisamente
participation in the commission was precisely to reach agreement and for there to be a consensus so as to be able to carry out the project.
sin embargo el
Nonetheless, the one that had to make the investment for this part, the eviction of the squatters, was the government of Guatemala, not Ferrovias.
But the one obligated to invest to rehabilitate the southern coast of the railroad wasn't FEWA, it was Ferrovias, correct?
en esta parte,
On this part, yes, the part that we're talking about of a relocation of the squatters, yes. All the other technical aspects, I don't know.
You don't know how much it would have cost Ferrovias to rebuild the railroad to the southern coast, correct?
no conozco el...
No, I don't know that information, just what was discussed in the commission having to do with relocation of the squatters.
Whether Ferrovias had funds or financing to rebuild the southern coast, correct?
No lo conozco.
porque
I don't know that
en la comisión de discutir
because there wasn't time for discussion of that in the commission.
Ms. Hernandez, you would agree with me, right, that the origin of the problem of the squatters on the right-of-way is because the train had stopped working, correct?
No necesariamente.
Not necessarily. In Guatemala, there are many other social reasons
podrían tratarse más ampliamente.
that could be addressed at greater length, but I can't affirm that.
But certainly, if the train doesn't operate, it's easier for the squatters to be on the right-of-way, correct?
Objection beyond the scope of her direct.
Oh, heck,
She testified about whose fault, about why the commission failed and about whether FEG had or had not financing to rebuild the southern coast. This is directly related to the squatter problem. What would have happened if the train and the rehabilitation had never happened?
Answer the question.
Creo que
I think, as I indicated, that it's a social problem in the country due to conditions of poverty and development. So it's not necessarily the case that it has to be on the right-of-way. We have many situations of squatters in Guatemala in different areas, both privately held and government-owned, that have been invaded. So it's not just over the railroad right-of-way. There are many examples.
With respect to squatters or invasions along or on the right-of-way, you would agree with me that one of the factors that contributes to that is the train not moving through the right-of-way, correct?
parcialmente.
In part, I can't agree with you fully for the reasons that I've stated. There are many circumstances.
And just to be clear, I think we're in agreement. I'm not saying it's the only factor, but it's certainly one factor, correct?
Sí.
Sí, no solo en Guatemala, en otros
Yes, and not just in Guatemala, but in other countries as well.
Absolutely. Now, you would also agree with me that, for example, with respect to squatters, both people and any other type of squatter, right along the right-of-way, if the train is passing, it is harder for those squatters to remain there, correct?
En el caso de Guatemala,
Not in the case of Guatemala.
invasores
Squatters continue being along many risky places, including in the right-of-way, even when the train is moving through. This has been a problem forever, ever since this form of transportation has existed in the country.
So then, even if the government removed the squatters, and even if FEG rehabilitated the right-of-way, and even if the train was operating along the southern coast, there still would have been a squatter problem, in your opinion?
no,
puedo afirmarlo.
I cannot state that with certainty.
Un problema que
It would be a problem
podría o no darse,
that might or might not come up.
que ser así.
I don't think it would necessarily have to be the case. It's likely that the population, if they see that they're in a risky area, and if trains, especially higher speed trains, begin to run through there, will leave the right-of-way.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. Mr. President, I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Salinas. You have any questions? Do you have any questions? No. There are no questions from the tribunal. Do you have anything else yourself?
No further questions.
Thank you again. Se puede retirar.
You may stand down.
we will have a 10 minutes pause and come back at 3:30 of the clock. Okay.